So I wanted to do a video that was a little bit different. A deep dive on a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. Now, I have seen a psychological deep dive in this before, but I wanted to come more from the angle as a therapist for interpretation of this. To me, it's not just a children's book. It serves as a bit of a sort of a metaphor for what happens when we ignore adversity in the household. And how things like anxiety can manifest and eventually get out of hand. So grab yourself a warm drink, lay back, relax, and let's get ready for story time. There's No Such Thing as a Dragon by Jack Kent. Billy Bixby was rather surprised when he woke up one morning and found a dragon in his room. It was a small dragon, about the size of a kitten. So a dragon appears. And you might ask, well, why a dragon? Well, the symbol of the dragon is universal. It can be seen all around the world in many different cultures. What does the dragon actually represent, you might ask? Now, in many ways, the dragon is an amalgamation of everything that threatens human well-being. It's a giant predator. It can fly, has razor-sharp claws that can cut flesh, with serpent-like impenetrable skin. And it also breathes fire. A dragon is a predator that can cause real harm to human beings. A dragon, in other words, is a reason to be anxious and aware. At the moment, it's currently small and it's manageable. It's a non-threatening problem, but it does warrant addressing. Looking at Billy's room, it's a little messy. I can see toys on the floor from previous days, strewn all over the floor. And I know he's a young kid, but he seems like he's of the age where he could tidy up and not let things get too disorganized around him. Maybe with the help of a parent, his mum or his dad. In a very small way, it feels like Billy's environment and his well-being is lacking in attention somewhat. Also, I don't know what business Billy has waking up at 12:30 a.m. and calling that the morning. No wonder he's seeing. The dragon wagged its tail happily when Billy patted its head. Billy chooses kindness in the face of adversity. He reaches out to it instead of running away. Billy went downstairs to tell his mother. "There's no such thing as a dragon," said Billy's mother, and she said it like she meant it. So Billy clearly talks to his mum about this anxiety, and maybe unintentionally not wording it in a way that an adult can fully understand or take seriously. But his behaviours in reaching out clearly exhibit that something's going on for him. Now, his mother, the figure of authority here, denies Billy's experience. She unintentionally gaslights what Billy knows, or at least feels, to be true. I also want to highlight that his mum is clearly a very busy person. Maybe she's somewhat overwhelmed herself. She may struggle to create the time and therefore lack the mental capacity to be fully attentive towards Billy's world and his emotional needs. You tend to see this a lot with busy parents. No matter what the reason though, Billy isn't being attended to. In fact, worse than that, he's being denied and therefore somewhat rejected by those most responsible for his well-being. The danger in this form of inattention or unintentional gaslighting is that it can warp the child's sense of self-knowledge. It throws off their internal compass as it forces them to question or reject that which they know to be relevant or true in themselves. It's these children that will often grow up into adults who struggle with boundary formation, as their early sense of self has been shaken up and unsettled. Billy went back to his room and began to dress. The dragon came close to Billy and wagged its tail, but Billy didn't pat it. If there's no such thing as something, it's silly to pat it on the head. See, Billy has learned from an authority figure that his problems, aren't worth acknowledging. What's reinforced here is the lesson, if I report that which troubles me, nothing is going to get done about it. So best to ignore it, push it down, and pretend like it doesn't exist. See, he would sooner rather gaslight himself than acknowledge the painful reality that someone whose job it is to love, care, and nurture me doesn't have the ability, or worse, refuses to support me in my most vulnerable times. This tension left unresolved can create real parental resentment, reinforcing an emotional void between the carer and the child long term. And it makes it very difficult to acknowledge in therapy as well, because on one hand, they are the only parents that I've got, and they did their best by me, given the circumstances. Yet, on the other hand, I was undeniably hurt by them. And it's a real dilemma to actually deal with, to acknowledge that those that I love the most, those that are closest to me, are also the ones who inflicted the deepest wounds. And we can often feel a little bit guilty talking about our parents in such a negative light. But it is important to note one very important thing, and that is they are not necessarily bad people. It's just that some of their behaviours that they exhibited hurt us deeply and resonated with us in a way that does require acknowledgement. Billy washed his face and hands and then went downstairs to breakfast. The dragon went along. It was bigger now, almost the size of a dog. See, Billy has clearly been brought up to be a good kid and to behave in the correct manner. But that doesn't always mean that he's been emotionally nurtured and listened to. It just means that he is well-mannered and obedient. Also, the problem has now got a lot bigger and continues to warrant attention. Billy sat down at the table. The dragon sat down on the table. This sort of thing was not usually permitted, but there wasn't much Billy's mother could do about it. She had already said there was no such thing as a dragon, and if there was no such thing, you can't tell it to get off the table. So the orderly routine of the household is starting to get slightly disordered now. In other words, the cracks are beginning to show. But if a parent is in denial or fails to acknowledge that there is a problem, they will often overlook the symptoms as they manifest. Or they will notice this gradual decline and defer blame on other things or even other people. Often with those in denial, it's the world that's the problem. It's never them. And this kind of mentality you see in individuals who once were a victim themselves, yet still remain unresolved and wounded. And this type of individual completely lacks accountability. They will almost never apologise. Mother made some pancakes for Billy, but the dragon ate them all. Mother made some more, but the dragon ate those too. Mother kept making pancakes until she ran out of batter. Billy only got one of them, but he said that was all he really wanted anyway. So you can see here that it's actually starting to affect his daily routine, his diet, and even his health. In many ways, ignoring the dragon has started to take away elements of pleasure in Billy's life. In real life, this is where anxiety begins to turn into a depression. He gets a little bit of sustenance and he says that that's enough, but Billy has learned to alter his needs and his requirements. He's learned to stifle his voice of truth. He knows he won't actually be listened to if he vocalizes his concerns anyway. The result is that Billy ends up lying about how he feels, suggesting that during adversity, he is fine. He has learned that he can't fully trust somebody with his emotions in a time of emotional distress, and this becomes incredibly isolating. Interestingly, his mum is more attentive towards Billy's physical needs, so that would be the food, over his emotional needs, which is this dragon that he speaks of. Often if you confront your parents years later about elements of your upbringing, they will suggest that you had a fantastic childhood because, you never went without food, or you always had a roof over your head, or you always had a bed to sleep in. You tend to find that they focus purely on how they continually met your physical needs of care, yet fail to acknowledge your emotional needs and requirements. Billy went upstairs to brush his teeth. Mother started clearing the table. The dragon, who was quite as big as Mother by this time, made himself comfortable on the hall rug and went to sleep. It's really affecting Billy. Now, off the back of this, the problem is as big as Billy's mother. And it's far harder now for her to ignore. By the time Billy came back downstairs, the dragon had grown so much it filled the hall. Billy had to go around by way of the living room to get to where his mother was. "I didn't know dragons grew so fast," said Billy. "There's no such thing as a dragon," said Mother, firmly. It's at this point that Billy vocalizes the problem once again, as it's clearly grown in size, and his mother dismisses him, firmly this time. It's almost like she's trying to convince herself. She's using frustration now in her tone to further shut down his acknowledgement of the problem. As the problem is becoming more apparent, it becomes ever harder for her to deny. Cleaning downstairs took Mother all morning, what with the dragon in the way, and having to climb in and out of windows to get from room to room. Now, if she feels overwhelmed or ill-equipped to deal with the problem, this will evoke a fear in Billy's mum. And fear is often at the heart of any reactive or dismissive or frustrated behaviour. Billy's mum's life will become undeniably more difficult. When life becomes undeniably difficult and we fail to deal with the adversity in a healthy way, we often seek control and escape via other avenues and other coping mechanisms. And this can come in the form of compulsive behaviours such as OCD in an attempt to manage and control the emotional internal turmoil, but from the outside, or in the form of pleasure derivative compulsions such as shopping, drinking or drugs. But given that this is a kid's book, I doubt that we're actually going to see Billy's mum rack up a line anytime soon. By noon, the dragon filled the house. Its head hung out the front door, its tail hung out the back door. And there wasn't a room in the house that didn't have some part of the dragon in it. By this point, this usually happens over the course of several days, weeks and months. You start to see the neighbours and passing members of the public who begin to notice a house that has lost its order and it's been thrown into a state of disorder. And we have all seen those kind of houses. The front of the houses are a complete mess and in a state of disrepair. Arguments can often be heard from outside, if not brought actually into the streets. We can often be very quick to judge without truly acknowledging what's actually happening behind closed doors. In all likelihood, the residents aren't lazy, they're just emotionally overwhelmed individuals struggling to function and cope with the additional pressures of daily life. When the dragon awoke from his nap, he was hungry. A bakery truck went by. The smell of fresh bread was more than the dragon could resist. The dragon ran down the street after the bakery truck. The house went along, of course, like a shell on a snail. The dragon is massive now. Anxiety consumes the entire house. When anxiety, neglect and trauma all go unchecked long term, it creates an emotionally unstable and unsettling environment that functions as a petri dish towards the development of things like ADHDs or BPDs and other impulsive compulsive behaviours that can cause us to act on impulse towards instant gratification of our wants and our needs. Hence the chasing of the instant pleasure despite the consequences here. Growing up with a hindered ability to delay gratification, that's the need for instant pleasure, such as things like sex, drugs, shopping, etc., is heavily associated with children who grew up in fatherless households or who grew up without an adequate father figure present. So my question is, where's Mr. Bixby at? The mailman was just coming up the path with some mail for the Bixbys when their house rushed past him and headed down the street. He chased the Bixby's house for a few blocks, but he couldn't catch it. Now, the mailman functions as a governmental representative of order, structure and organisation. And the Bixby's house has gone so far that the governmental order can no longer keep up with it. This arguably is when things have gone too far and the law is being broken. So in real life, it'd be things like bills aren't getting paid or drugs are being used. The order of the house has fallen into chaos. When Mr. Bixby came home for lunch, the first thing he noticed was that the house was gone. Luckily, one of the neighbours was able to tell him which way it went, by an odd lady who's dressed like a POW from the waist down with a shifty salute. Mr. Bixby got in his car and went looking for the house. He studied all the houses as he drove along. Finally, he saw one that looked familiar. Billy and Mrs. Bixby were waving from an upstairs window. Mr. Bixby is now attempting to restore order to chaos here. Billy and his mum waved to Mr. Bixby like two people lost, isolated on a desert island, awaiting rescue. Now, we might be tempted at this point to think that Mr. Bixby is the hero. However, let's not be too hasty here. We do have to ask ourselves, how did it get this bad in the first place? Mr. Bixby climbed over the dragon's head, onto the porch roof, and through the upstairs window. Now, it's at this point that the chaos or the turmoil can no longer be ignored. You can see this as Billy's dad literally acknowledges the problem head on. How did this happen? Mr. Bixby asked. It was the dragon, said Billy. There's no such thing, Mother started to say. There is a dragon, Billy insisted. A very big dragon. And Billy patted the dragon on the head. Now, although Billy's dad knows that there is an unavoidable problem, he asks, how did this happen? Proving that he hasn't actually been paying enough attention, perhaps from working too much. Now, he doesn't deny that there is a problem, he just fails to notice it growing at all. So arguably, what he's been doing is he's been neglecting matters closer to home. Again, he's supporting the family physically with money and his hard work, but he's not emotionally present enough. But for Billy, who isn't 100% like his parents, as is seen with every generation, hopefully improves on the last, he does pay attention and he does know where the chaos began. So much so that he is able to fill the void of his dad's ignorance. Hence why we can learn so much from children, as they aren't caught up and tainted by society and the adult world yet. They tend to be more in the moment. And his mother's still in denial, despite how blindingly obvious the turmoil is now. It takes things getting really bad and for others to notice, for Billy to find the courage to challenge his mother once again and speak truth in the face of denial and adversity, and refuse to go along with the lie anymore. Not only is Billy able to name the problem, he is also able to describe it in detail, making it even harder to deny and gaslight. Openness to the problem rather than a closed denial or ignorance. The dragon wagged its tail happily. Then, even faster than it had grown, the dragon started getting smaller. The problem gets smaller, even faster than it had grown. And this is what you often see in therapy. A lifetime of adversity healed in a matter of weeks or months due to an acknowledgement of the issue within a loving and accepting environment. It wouldn't work if the therapist denied the individual's experience or didn't try and understand them on a human level. You can also see the tow truck here, cleaning up and repairing the aftermath of the chaos inflicted by other people's unattended dragons. And in real life, this aftermath affects those who are closest to those in emotional turmoil. For example, ex-partners, friends and family. And it is they who have to repair the damage that they have received just by being in the vicinity. I don't mind dragons this size, said Mother. Why did it have to grow so big? I'm not sure, said Billy. But I think it just wanted to be noticed. Hallelujah. Now, the fact that the dragon is still there means that life's adversities are unavoidable. But if they aren't acknowledged, they can get out of hand and incredibly difficult and overwhelming in scale to manage alone. As a therapist, this is a problematic ending for me. You see, because the mum, still after all of this, remains oblivious as to why the problem grew so big in the first place. And the dad continues to stay silent on the matter. And neither at this point have actually apologised to Billy. You know, Billy as a child teaches them best that he can what he's learned, and kind of what he already knew, which is a problem needs to be noticed. However, I would argue that noticing a problem isn't 100% the answer. You see, Billy's mum, she notices the problem from the beginning, yet she adamantly denied its existence. Billy's dad, he noticed that there was a problem as well. He had to be pushed to his limit and for things to get completely out of control to acknowledge that there was actually a problem there. Both failed to act on it and actually acknowledged that there was a problem in the first place, meaning the problem still remains small in the background, leaving Billy to try and figure it out for himself in a household of two carers who, let's face it, are willfully blind and totally lack accountability. Sound familiar? Although what they're doing by metaphorically feeding the dragon is addressing its existence with love and compassion. And that certainly is a step in the right direction towards healing. You see, this is really important. Trauma and problematic behaviours are inherited until somebody says no. And I do believe that's the meaning behind this book here. It's a beautiful kids book and I think it has some deep meaning to it. So all we can do is learn from our parents, and they can learn from their parents, and we can learn from ourselves, and we can reflect on our own behaviors moving forward. And we can just look inward and say, is there anything problematic with me? And how can I address that? But not with shame, with love and with kindness. So with that, I will bid you all farewell. I hope you enjoyed the story, and there'll be many more to come. Take care and goodbye for now. Bye for now.